is Business Therapy, healing businesses from the inside out through communication and emotional intelligence. I'm Diane Dye Hansen, management consultant, and with me co-host Christine Salvo, therapist, certified mediator, and certified hypnotherapist.
Good morning, everyone. Hello.
Good morning, everybody. Today on the show, we have Robin Weeks, who has a background in business and experiential learning. She has designed and delivered leadership and team development trainings with Fortune 100 and 500 companies for over 12 years. She started My Pivotal Point in 2010 to focus on working regionally with small to mid-sized businesses to help them develop strong managers and leaders for their growth. She does this through coaching and leadership development trainings. In 2020, after caring for her mother for over 6 years, she launched My Pivotal Point Caring for Caregivers. This business is focused on supporting family caregivers through coaching and supporting employers through caregiver education and support. She is a certified Big Five for the Workplace Personality Consultant and coach, certified in conflict resolution through the Roanoke, Virginia Center for Peace and Conflict Resolution, trained facilitator, and a certified caregiving consultant. Welcome to the show, Robin.
Thank you for having me, Diane and Christine. It's great to be here.
Yeah, what an amazing bag of tricks you have.
So you started My Pivotal Point in 2010, and 10 years later, you made a pivot to caregivers. What's the story behind that?
Well, I started caring for my mother after my father died in 2012, I believe it was, yeah. And ended up, I was traveling from Virginia to Tennessee, looking after her, realized that I couldn't keep that up and keep running my own business. So I moved her to Virginia to an apartment where she could be closer to me. And as I was caring for her, really, but basically at that point, looking after her, she was in good shape. She was no longer driving, so I had to do a lot of that for her. But at any rate, in the process of teaching and training managers in my leadership courses, I would walk into my class and I would say, hey guys, I've got my cell phone here. Let's turn these little boxes off for the next several hours, except for me, because I'm looking after my mother and I never know when a call is going to come in. And so what that did was that prompted a lot of those managers in my courses to come up to me on breaks and say, I just started caring for my father, or I just started caring for my grandmother, and I don't know what to do. I'm so stressed. And at this point, I was several years into caring for my mother, so I had some answers. I had some resources. I had some experiences to share with them. And so after my mother died in 2018, I spent the year, I had at some point in the latter half of her life, the probably last 2 to 3 years of her life, I had to cut back on my client load because she had become more frail and she had to move into more care. And I had to spend more and more time managing her care and looking after her. And so I had to cut back on my business. But after she died, I realized, wow, this was such an experience looking after my mother and caring for her. And it had an impact on me that it took me really over a year to sort of sort through and reflect upon and decide, what do I do with this? And I was meeting all these managers in my leadership classes that needed help and didn't know where to go. And they felt alone and isolated, just like I had. And so I thought, I need to do something with this. I need to help these people. I need to help these people. I had no help. I need them to have help. They don't need to be alone. And so I found a company where I could go through a coach training certification program to become certified as a caregiving consultant. And I did that and was certified at the end of 2019. And I started my business in 2020. And of course, we all know what happened in March. So things slowed down a little bit, but I'm still working a lot with some caregivers one-on-one. I'm really working hard right now to figure out how to get this service into companies. Caregivers in the workplace are a silent, growing number of people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And just hearing your story, it's almost one of those topics very few people talk about. If you have a new baby or if you have toddlers,
Right.
you'll say, oh, well, I need to keep my phone on for my kids. But you rarely hear people say, I need to keep my phone on for my parents. But, you're so right. And I deal with all ages and all that kinds of things. And the issues that start happening sometimes come on very slowly or sometimes very rapidly.
Yeah.
And there is no training, right?
No.
There is
No.
no warning. It's like, I'm working with someone right now who used to be a very highly functioning person that may actually have to start adjusting lifestyle issues because the symptoms are coming on so rapidly and it's early,
Yeah.
right? And so what do we do? What do we do? I mean, I love that you did it yourself. It's like you went the unpaved path, right? But then you gathered a few ideas and tools and tricks and tips, and you actually chose, or maybe it chose you to do something with this.
Yeah. Well, and you're absolutely right, Christine. Caregivers fall into this role either gradually, as I did. I was going to check on my mother once a month. I started noticing things weren't right. And then I talked to her doctor, and he said she's lonely and sad and she needs her family. I'm like, okay, time to take care of this. Or they fall into it through a crisis, a parent or an older adult or a spouse, they have a sudden illness or they end up in the hospital, and now you're in crisis and you're in reactive mode. And what I really want to do is try to catch those caregivers before they get to crisis. Try to give them tools and plans and strategies and ways to prepare so that when the crisis occurs, it's not a total bomb in your lap.
Mhm.
You've got some tools.
So what would you say is a crisis? How would someone know if they're in crisis point? Because sometimes we don't know we're drowning because we don't know we're in the water. You know what I mean? And then you get a third person perspective, like a therapist or a coach or consultant, and we're like, "How long have you been drowning?" And they're like, "I'm drowning? I didn't even know," because sometimes crisis and chaos becomes normal,
Right, that's
and
very
it's
true.
hard to identify backwards, right?
Yeah, that's very true.
So what are
Well,
some things you would describe as the crisis point?
well, I think with an older parent, you have a lot of signs and signals before you get to a crisis. Um, with my mother going to across the state line once a month, I noticed things in her apartment that weren't getting done, and the bills weren't getting paid, and little things. And you have to start paying attention to the little things. And that allowed me to make the decision against my brother's wishes to move her here so that I could look after those things and support her and help her. What often happens with a crisis, and I had enough of those, and I wasn't prepared for those at the time, the phone call comes, Robin, your mother's had a fall. We've sent her to the emergency room.
Oh yeah.
You have to drop everything. I could have been, it happened. I've been in the middle of a training and I have to, I'm sorry guys, I gotta go. I can't stay, I gotta go. And I, not that I could have been prepared for her to go to the ER, but I could have been prepared for the impact that would have on me and what I would need to do when I got there rather than being fearful and worried and scared. So
Right.
I think those are some
Well,
things.
well, and I love that you really described having to wear two hats. And one is the reasonable, rational, what needs to be done, but the other one is the scared child. Just because we're older and our parents are older, we're still terrified of something happening to them, right? Nobody's ever really prepared for this kind of change. And watching someone that you've either admired or you've at least seen them in their best slowly start to change or fast, as you said, in these ways that they almost can become unrecognizable, right? Where's
Yeah.
that strong woman or strong man that I knew that now requires so much care, that now requires so much of my attention? And so I do think there's a split in the psychology. One is like, I just got to get stuff done because I'm the caretaker role. And the other one is, I'm scared child.
Right.
Right,
Right. And
exactly. I mean, I love that there's the sound of a dog in the background of this episode because it is like that barking dog. It is this thing that is ever present, that is wearing on your mind, body, spirit. And you kind of have to also go about business as usual while this barking dog is going on. That is the caregiving situation. It's like if and there's there's tools to deal with to deal with the dog. It's you. And so Robin, what are those tools that our listeners can use if they have kind of that barking dog situation, that situation that could drive them into crisis, but it's how you allow it to impact you.
Well, one of the things that I've learned through this experience is that you can create a crisis emergency, an emergency plan. So, for example, the emergency occurs, your parent has a fall, they've gone to the ER. Who do you call? You know, who do I call to go home and take care of my barking dog? Feed my animals, take care of, things for me. Who's on my team? I create this concept of creating a caregiving team. Who's on your team? And you have different teams for different things. So who's on your caregiving team if you need a break and you need to go away for a long weekend?
So
Who's on
respite care.
Yeah, who's on your team if there is a crisis and you have to spend days in the hospital and you can't be home to take care of your dog? So I created this course on creating your caregiving team to teach people how to look at who are the people in their lives, what are the roles those people can play, and how, just like any team, how do you communicate with them? How do you delegate to them? How do you lead them?
So what I'm kind of hearing here is I always tell young parents, because young parents are always in crisis, right? And I'm like, listen, it takes a village to raise a kid. I'm like, no matter what you do, you're only going to have so much influence because other people will impact their upbringing, their ideas, what they want as well. But what I'm kind of hearing you say is it takes a village for our elderly too.
Yeah, back to something you said earlier, I think, Christine, is that, we celebrate having a baby with baby showers, and we let parents go away for recitals and ball games and graduations and college visits, and caregivers don't talk about those things. It's awkward. It's awkward to talk about the fact that your parent is incontinent.
Right.
It's awkward to talk about the fact that your parent needs to use a walker or a wheelchair. You just don't talk about those things like you do having a child and raising a child. And it's an honor to care for your parent. It truly is. It's a gift.
I think that's beautiful. I do. I think that's beautiful that you come from that place of honoring. And it is a full circle, full cycle of life kind of process, right? They helped you. Now we get the honor and the privilege to help them. And yet I think that what you're really bringing to the table here is let's let this be like in mental health. One of the things I say is we need to talk about it like past the salt. And I tell families this every day because I deal with suicidal people all the time, right? And I'm like, I don't want this to be some awkward conversation at your home. Just every day when you're having dinner, you feeling suicidal today? How's your suicidal thoughts been? If we can just start, hey, they don't have control of them. They're not doing it on purpose to inconvenience or piss people off, right? So if we just start normalizing it like past the salt, all of a sudden a lot of the stigma, a lot of the stuff goes away, especially for the person dealing with it. So I'm even hearing this in elderly care because this isn't a conversation. Caregivers aren't getting support. Where are you supposed to find this extra time? When you have a toddler, it's hard to work. So many families decide to go single income because it's just too hard. They have an appointment, we have this, a sick kid, daycare is expensive. And the same issues are presented later in life. In fact, they're presented, but they're exacerbated, they're increased. Because you can't send an elderly person at daycare for $2,000 a month, which is still a lot of money. But you can't do that. There's not an option really in that way, right? It goes from 0 to about $5,000-6,000 a month, right? There's very little support in between.
Right.
And so I think being able to have this as a normal conversation, especially in business.
Well, I think in the workplace, one of the things we need to look at is creating what we call a lifespan culture.
Ooh, please
From
explain.
birth to death. So we let moms and dads have paternal and maternity leave, right? We celebrate that. We give them time off for all sorts of things with their kids. It's okay if their kid's sick and they have to work from home. But the caregivers in the workplace, they're not talking about what they're doing. They're not talking about the average 20 hours a week they spend caregiving.
Oh, easy, yeah.
And that's either someone in their home or someone in a care facility, either way. They're not talking about their experiences because there's a stigma attached to that. There are people that have to pick up the slack when they have to leave work suddenly. There are people that have to pick up the slack when they can't come into work because they're in the ER or the hospital with the parent. And they're not talking about that role. They're not telling the management about what they're doing. And 30% of those caregivers in the workplace are going to quit.
Yeah, they can't.
Because they can't handle the stress. I cut back on my business by 30% because I couldn't.
Yep, you
So
can't do it all. That
you
superhuman,
can't do it all.
Superman complex.
No.
At some point we start dropping something.
No. So I really believe that, part of my mission here is really to support caregivers and to educate those employers that, this is a lifespan culture. It's a retention and recruitment issue for employers because 25% of the 53 million caregivers in our country are millennials.
Really?
Yes.
That's a pretty shocking statistic. I
Yes.
hadn't realized that.
Yes.
So these are people still in their mid, they're younger, they're under 50.
They're under 50. Mm-hmm.
And then trying to manage. So
Yeah.
typically in that age range, you're still doing the lifespan of raising your own kids, right?
Yeah, they're
you're
a sandwich generation.
Yeah, I always like telling my parents, like, this is your 20 years. This is just a lifespan thing of raising kids. That's all you're going to do for 20 years. Just don't worry about anything else. That's what you're going to do. And then you're going to wake up and go, what the heck do I do with all this free time? And then we have a parent to take care of. So,
Right.
so I thought I was going to enjoy it. And oh, kids are in college. Come on in, mom or dad. Right. And helping people through all of these transitions. So how did you come up with this lifespan culture from life to death? As long as I've been doing what I've been doing in the books that I've read, I've never actually read this concept or heard of it. And you just totally blew my mind. I think it's brilliant.
Well, actually, it was a collaboration effort with another caregiving consultant that I worked with. We started talking about, how can we get to employers? How can we support caregivers in the workplace? And, we want to support all caregivers, but caregivers in the workplace are really missing out on benefits and support. And as I said, they're not talking about it. And so we created an ebook together. And what we came up with this concept of the lifespan culture, from birth to death, honor the lifespan of your family. And that we did a lot of research. There's a ton of research and data out there. The Harvard Business School did a report called The Caring Company. There are a lot of companies, mostly the bigger ones, that have provided caregiver benefits. But most companies don't even have it on the radar. So we wrote this ebook and we sort of put this theme in there of the lifespan culture that needs to be created within companies.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And
Yes,
to your
yes,
point
yes.
about benefits too. So the Family and Medical Leave Act of 1993, Congress did intend that employees don't have to choose between keeping their jobs and attending to seriously ill family members, but it's not the whole story. FMLA allows for 12 weeks of unpaid leave within a 12-month period, and the employer is responsible for getting the information on that from the employee. Right. But it's that discomfort that you were talking about. It's uncomfortable to talk about. So it seems to me that part of that, that culture development should be, creating safe spaces to talk about these sensitive subjects so that things like FMLA can be used and possibly, even develop a culture where more is not just allowed, but embraced.
And you're exactly right, Diane. So there is FMLA, and the report that was done by the Harvard Business School did a lot of research on what benefits are caregivers using. Well, they're not using their PTO, paid time off, because they don't want to use that up. They're not using FMLA for the most part. What they really want are some support so that they can find resources. Caregivers are so busy, they don't have time to Google for resources. What they want are some subsidies to help pay for perhaps in-home care if their parent is staying with them. What they want is some paid time off, real paid time off that they can use if there is a family crisis, parent goes to the hospital. My mother had a gallbladder infection and she went into sepsis. So she was in intensive care for 3 days and then another 3 days in the hospital. And I was going to the hospital every single day.
Yeah.
And you can't make an appointment to talk to the doctor. You just have to wait for them, right? So, that's very hard when you're trying to work. And so caregivers need some benefits enhanced, like paid time off or family leave or, work sharing. or flex time.
I was just gonna say flexibility, right? I need to get
Yeah,
this
the
doctor's
flex.
appointment. I got to go at the
Yeah,
drop of a hat, and I don't want to worry if I don't have a job now, right? Like I'm
right.
already
Yeah,
so worried and so consumed, but now enhancing that stress with, can I take care of myself?
right,
Can I move forward in my own career? Does my life just stop because
right,
this happened?
right. Recently, I was messaging with a woman who is in her prime of her career, and she's recently had to move her mother from one state to her town in another state to assisted living after a fall and some surgeries. And she said she has used up all of her own vacation time to do this.
Yeah.
That's not right.
Right.
That's
So,
just not right.
so then what I know about that is burnout.
Exactly.
So I'm using my rest and recuperation time to now do all this busy work and all this other stuff for other people, that by the time I get back to work, I'm even usually more exhausted.
Yeah.
So I haven't recouped any of that energy or rest or any of those things I needed to do. And in fact, my productivity might even be lower.
Exactly. And that's all of those things, Christina, I'm so glad you brought that up. Those are costs to employers. So there's what we call absenteeism, obviously. There's what we call presenteeism. So you're at work, but you're not productive, what you just described. There's turnover. Hey, I just can't take the stress anymore, so I'm going to quit. And when you think about the demographics of 38 to 55, 60% are women in the peak of their careers. When they quit, they're taking company knowledge with them. So there's a statistic, I think is AARP did a research, cost to employers of all of those things is about $38 billion a year.
Oh, I believe it.
Yeah.
And it's something that I hear it because people get therapy for it.
Right.
But it's not because it's on a mass scale. And I've heard story after story out of story, and I'm a major support for that. And I try to help with the resources, but this is even really helpful for me. I appreciate that. I didn't know all of these statistics, but I do see people pulling their hair out going, and relationships end as well.
Yeah.
And that's something I really see, is that it can cause major and unrepairable rifts, because it's, hey, I married you. I didn't marry your extended family that's now living here. I get no attention. Everything's about them. And now this caring, loving person is in the position to choose, or it's just chosen for them. I'm sorry, I can't walk out on my parents. I'm sorry, I can't put them in a home. They begged me not to. That was our agreement, whatever the case is. So there are interpersonal consequences as well.
Right. Yeah, caregiver burnout is a real mental health issue, and obviously that's a health cost to employers as well. I hit a wall at one point. The average time a person cares for a parent is about 4 years, and I cared for my mother 6.5. I've known people that care for their parent much longer than that, but you hit a wall. At some point you're going to hit the wall, and you need tools to take care of that, and you need support to take care of that. And it is not always, hey, go to Aruba for a weekend,
Right. So if we have a leader listening to this show right now who it's starting to resonate with them, they're thinking about maybe employees that they know have something going on. They're maybe even thinking about themselves. What would be the first step in really starting to create that kind of cradle to grave type caregiving culture in an organization?
Yeah, thanks, Diane. Yeah. So the first step actually is to start the conversation in the workplace. Take a census. AARP has a free census. Can certainly send a link to that if anyone's interested. But to take a census, because they're silent. They're not telling the management. They might tell their direct manager, but they're not telling anyone else. But you have to start the conversation. It has to start at the executive level, to open that door to say, it's okay for us to talk about taking care of your parent or your grandparent or your spouse, who may be, ill or physically disabled. So, or your child. So it's opening the conversation. That's the first step. It's not open right now. So it's somewhere at the top levels of companies. They have to start having this conversation and have to start taking a sense of how 1 in 5 people in this country are caregivers. 1 in 6 expect to become a caregiver. And I'll just throw another statistic. Okay, so by the year 2030, there will be more people over the age of 65 in this country than under the age of 18.
Wow. I knew that was coming because we've all
Yeah.
been preparing for this bottleneck, right?
Yeah.
Of like,
And you're right. It's a
what are we
bottleneck.
going to do?
Yeah.
What
What are we going to do?
going to do?
Yeah.
Because this is actually a crisis.
Yes, it is. It is.
Absolutely. What
it is
are
a
we going to
huge-
do? How are we going to do it? How are we going to manage? I'm really loving the perspective of getting businesses involved. And that's really one of the premises of our show is just we bring this kind of conversation to business because they have to be had. You can't run a
Yes.
successful business and not support your employees that are going through, because people grieve as they caregive. And that's something I
Right.
can tell you. The grieving process starts then.
Yeah.
So a lot of the emotional issues, a lot of the bargaining, a lot of the anger, all the stages happen while this person is still alive. And it
Right.
doesn't mean it doesn't happen after death too, but they start the grieving process as well, which is extremely stressful on top of
Yeah.
everything else.
Yeah.
And so if we're not supporting, we're really dropping the ball. And your numbers are just blowing my mind. Like, wow.
Yeah. It's what they call anticipatory grief. So,
Mhm.
especially with an older parent or grandparent, they're at the end of their life. They're already talking about it themselves. My mother used to always say to me, I wonder how much longer I'm going to live. I was horrified at first, but then I just got used to hearing it. I'm like, yeah, you're at the end of your life. I was like, I know, Mom.
Right. You're trying to negotiate. And she's like, honey, come on.
Let's make the best of what we got, But yeah, it's a big, big crisis we're getting ready to face. COVID has pulled the sheets off of it in a lot of ways. And we need to do something about it. We have to get employers to begin to look at this, to open the conversation, take a census, look at how many caregivers are in their employ. You don't want to lose those people, their knowledge.
No,
they're productive and they're not.
And they need their job. Jobs provide more than an income. It provides an outlet. It provides creativity. It provides self-esteem, self-worth.
Exactly.
So we, like you said, they're already isolated, alone, and now they have to quit their jobs. Like this, it's pretty significant from the mental health front too.
Yeah.
So where would our listeners find you? Do you have a website or social media that they can go to if they want to know more?
I do. Yeah. My website is mypivotalpoint.com. And you will find my corporate leadership work on there, as well as a page for my caregiving services. I am on Facebook, My Pivotal Point Caring for Caregivers. And I have a private group there where we have conversations and share, and I provide information and inspiration and tips. I'm also on LinkedIn at Robin Weeks. And I'm currently in the process of building a membership site for caregivers so that they'll have a community to go to, resources, webinars, educational courses, that sort of thing.
Yes, please do. And what's the name of your ebook that you mentioned earlier, and where can people find that?
Well, they'll have to email me for that. It's free, and my email address is robin@mypivotalpoint.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so, Robin, for being on Business Therapy. It was amazing having you, and such a important conversation we need to have about, how we treat the human resource in time of crisis when caring for a loved one. So thank you so very much for all your information.
Thank you both. I enjoyed this so much. Thanks for the conversation.
Wonderful. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye-bye.
This has been Business Therapy, healing businesses from the inside out through communication and emotional intelligence. I'm Diane Hansen, management consultant.
And I'm Christine Salvo, licensed marriage and family therapist, advanced certified mediator, and certified hypnotherapist. Thank you so much for listening today. Have a wonderful day.
Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye. This is Business Therapy, healing businesses from the inside out through communication.